I just want to do something that I'm going to commit to.
I'm so compelled to share, to pull other people out of their situation.
And I'm giving hope to women just like me who, probably felt unseen or probably...
It's just about finding what you love and what you're passionate about.
Do what you love. Do what you love.
And I really realized that this is what happens once you let go. You just create all that space,
It's about helping each other. It's about growing with each other. It's about being true to self.
To whom much is given, much is required.
You only ever have one obstacle, and that's yourself.
Welcome to the Commit to Change. Change your life, change your future.
Hey, and welcome to the Commit to Change, otherwise known as C2C podcast, that gives a voice to people who may be considered a small fry in their industry, but are doing big things in their communities. I am Miss Nikki, your host, the Jane of all trades, but the master of living. I am committed to introducing local VIPs, which are vivaciously inspiring people to you, to encourage you on your daily journey, as well as let you know what is possibly happening to you or happening in your area. Today's guest comes, actually, you know what? What state are you in?
California.
California knows how to party. Hey, okay, sorry. So we have in the house, Miss Chinwe Ohanele. Welcome to the C2C podcast. Say hi.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So of course, as always, I have to give you a little insight on who our wonderful guest is. She's so beautiful over there. Okay. She is an attorney and an entrepreneur who has navigated the politics of identity, culture, and access much of her life. She runs a law firm that caters to the BIPOC creatives, entrepreneurs, and small businesses. Chinwe has worked extensively on frameworks necessary to support Pan-African media initiatives and creative entrepreneurship. She oversaw the restructuring, rebranding, and repositioning of an online digital magazine examining the varied experiences of African diaspora. Additionally, Chinwe has consulted with various Nigerian entertainment and media stakeholders around best practices and policies necessary for de-risking investments in an uncertain market. Chinwe is now using her professional skills as a lawyer and her passion for content to share how intellectual property can empower underrepresented voices empower underrepresented voices. I need to do the inflection a little different. And address wealth disparities for invisible communities. Her goal is to demystify the legalese behind, I hope I said that right, legalese. Did I say that right?
Yep.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Legalese behind intellectual property for minority communities so that we can monetize and maintain the value of our ideas and our stories. Again, give a warm welcome to Ms. Chinwe Ohanele. Yay!
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I sound so exciting when you read that. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting. And you pretty much said everything. Like you said, my name is Chinwe Ohanele. I'm an attorney based in California. I'm licensed in California as well as New York and New Jersey. And I'm really passionate about creative entrepreneurship and innovators, especially underserved and underrepresented minorities. I think that, we hear a lot about like Silicon Valley, and we hear a lot about like the Disneys and the Marvels and like all of these sort of West-facing, creators and creatives. But a lot of times we forget, we live in a massive world, right? It's global, and the story of humanity is also global. So just because we have, most of the stories coming from a small minority doesn't mean that that's all the stories that are out there. So a little bit about me. I was born in Nigeria. My family immigrated to the US, and I have since been a Cali girl. So definitely lived all up and down the state of California. Grew up in the East Bay, Walnut Creek, Concord, Clayton area. And then I went to college at the University of the Pacific. Hey, Tigers. And then I moved on to Southern California and graduated from Loyola Marymount's Law School, Loyola Law School of Los Angeles, which, funny enough, two of our alumni, one is Johnny Cochran. So those of you who know the O.J. Simpson case, he's one of our alums. And then Mark Garagos, who most famously represented Chris Brown during that whole Rihanna thing. So we have some pretty illustrious attorneys who came from our law school. So super excited to, like shout them out, Loyola LLS. So after that, ended up living in New York for a little bit. That's how I ended up passing the bar out east, came back to California, passed here as well. Throughout my journey, living in the States, a big part of my identity is my Nigerian heritage. And growing up in predominantly white, neighborhoods and going to predominantly white schools, it's easy to sort of like feel like a fish out of water. And, I'm the first lawyer in our family, so not really having an understanding of how to navigate, going to law school or graduate school. So figuring out a lot of stuff on my own, but always, finding a way to like make your way through. Identity was really important to me. I mean, my name, I don't have an English name, like it's very Nigerian. So the first interaction most people have with me is like, how do you say your name? Or where is that from? People will see my name and be like, are you Chinese or are you Hawaiian? It's like, no, I'm Nigerian. So my culture a lot of times is the first thing that it's the first story I tell, right? My family's immigration story. And then for me growing up, trying to, live in kind of two worlds, being Nigerian culturally, but also living in the US and navigating what it means to be a Black woman in the US. So there was that story that carried me through as well. And growing up, I loved reading and watching movies. And I remember thinking how powerful it was, the ability to like read a book and be transplanted in a completely different world, a whole different adventure that you could never imagine. And that really stuck with me, the ability to use stories to communicate and connect with people. And so even though, I ended up doing the more practical, going to law school and getting a legal job, I was always drawn back to the intersection of storytelling, creativity, and culture. And so I would find myself volunteering a lot for organizations that were focused on sort of diaspora efforts, the African diaspora, or organizations that were supporting creatives or startups from the continent and introducing them to the ecosystem here. And through that journey, myself and two friends ended up actually putting on a comic book convention in Lagos, Nigeria in 2018. Oh, wow. And that was a phenomenal sort of like life-changing experience. And if, most of your viewers or listeners remember, 2017 was when we saw the trailer for Black Panther. And so that was the first time people had even like thought of like an African superhero, or like the idea of an African city that had, or an African country that had, power and resources and, sophistication. And so it was important for me and my friends at that time to be like, yeah, there's this idea in Marvel, this superhero, but there are places and there are stories that actually come from the continent that are just as exciting and just as powerful. And we don't have to wait for Marvel to show us what we can be and what what our future looks like. We can do it ourselves. And so that was what led to, Unicon Africa 2018. It was a really great experience. We had 700 people show up. We did a host of stakeholder programs and, interacted with like Microsoft and Google and the American Business Council in Nigeria. We got the support of the US Embassy to put on the programming. And it was really exciting because I think for the first time we had both the creatives and, finance, government, policy, private sector people coming together saying, hey, you know what? Animation, comics, and gaming is possible on the continent. There are, stories that are amazing that could really reach global appeal. And a lot of the initiatives that, I'm working on now started from that little seed that we had in 2018, that initial curiosity and excitement about, authentic African storytelling. And now, Netflix is, set up shop in Nigeria, and there's a bunch of new deals that are coming out. We have, I think they just announced a young adult, the first young adult story, Nigerian story, will be produced by Netflix, and it's going to be global. There's a bunch of, unique stories that are coming out of Nollywood. So, it started with Black Panther, but now we're seeing South Africa, Nigeria, and soon the rest of the continent will be able to be telling their stories on a global platform. So for me, that's exciting. But where the real opportunity, I think, comes in is for everyday creatives. You don't have to be at the level of Netflix. You don't have to be at the level of Marvel to have an impact. And I think that's what I really want people to understand, that it's not just about telling a story, it's about owning your story and knowing how to monetize it, how to position it, and how to set up your business so that you can have the kind of reach that you want without having to be corporate. Because I think that there's an opportunity now in a way that we've never seen before for creatives to build the kind of life and business that they can, buy a house, they can raise their families, they can, go on vacation. There's the potential now because of the internet to connect with so many people and reach so many, eager listeners and audiences that you could really build a business that could sustain your life. I think gone are the days when you have patrons of the arts who, are supporting the livelihood of one artist. And I also think gone are the days where we talk about the starving artist. I really hate that idea. Like the creative and innovative sector are so necessary. And if it's not for pushing technology forward, it's for being a reflection of our humanity, like reminding us of who we are and, calling us to look at where we've gone wrong and maybe where we've done well. So for me, I'm just super excited because I think the internet is giving a lot of opportunities to minority communities. Now it's just time to harness that opportunity, build on it, and take it to a new level. So that's a little bit about me. I know that was like a whole lot, but I'm looking forward to unpacking a little bit more as we have this conversation.
Wow. But I'm glad that you shared all of that. Wow. Who would have thought, because when you initially introduce yourself, you're like, I'm a lawyer. And as a lawyer, you don't think that you're involved with all those things. People, they're really on the smaller spectrum of thought when it comes to lawyering,
Mm-hmm.
and we think of the Johnny Cochrans, we think of Law and Order. We don't think
Mm-hmm.
that you're like making movement in other countries and you start in comic conventions, conventions. Like I'm like, what? I'm just listening to you. For half a second I forgot I was interviewing because I was just like, oh my goodness. And then you started talking about just like bringing things back to the community and people realizing that their gifts can be monetized. I was like, oh my God, she's talking about this. She's talking about the podcast. I need to hire her as my lawyer. I need to bring you on because you was talking about this stuff. No, but I was just like, I was really intrigued by all the movement that you're doing, taking it from the law firm to the streets,
Yeah.
I love it. Like just the fact that you have that compassion and the selfless service to give back and to build up the community, and not just about, I'm going to do what I got to do in the courtroom and that's it. So thank you for sharing. It wasn't too much. Like, we want to get to know you. Like, definitely give us all the juice, y'all. So, so my question, I know you said that your culture, your heritage is what caused you, of course, to give back to like to bring in Nigeria and doing things outside. But when was it that you decided that you wanted to dedicate your life to the community? Was there something that happened, or it just was a flow of things?
I think that's a good question. I don't know if it was a particular moment, but I think that I've always been very aware of how different I was. Even in the East Bay, where I grew up, the community was predominantly, I would say, white and Asian and East Asian. So in my high school class, there were like about 400 students, and I was one of 4 Black kids. And, you know, at the time, and I would say throughout my education, I've always sort of known that I was different, but it never felt like a negative thing necessarily. It always felt like an opportunity to share, you know, who I am and where I come from. I also will say that, you know, as an immigrant child, and I think this, you know, this tension comes up a bit, where children of African immigrants don't always invest in understanding the unique history of Blackness in the US. And so it's easy to disconnect yourself from that heritage and from that story. But when I got to college, I took this course, Race, Gender, and Ethnicity, I think. And it was taught by still one of my favorite professors. And we read a couple of books on like critical race theory, and it looked at why the fundamental legal structures in the US are inherently biased, not necessarily from, I mean, if you take away the history, right, for one moment, you take away the history and you just look at the fact that the founding fathers were predominantly white, upper class, land-owning men. They're not going to be able to perceive the world of a Black woman because they don't know what that is. And there's only so much storytelling and narrative can inform someone who doesn't live in that body. So that's why a lot of the laws are going to be inherently biased because they come from a perspective that's limited. And so I think a lot of times when we have like what's going on now in terms of Black Lives Matter and looking like at policing and social institutions that have been weakened because they don't have the, you know, financial support or the societal support to be effective, I think a lot of people feel like, okay, like, you know, allies or people who are privileged will say, ooh, you know, I feel guilty, like I don't know what to do. And it's like, yes, there is an emotional aspect to it. But if you want to look at what activism looks like inclusion. Activism looks like self-awareness. Activism looks like asking someone who typically isn't at the table for their opinion and their perspective. For me, that's why intellectual property is such a key area, because when people think of IP, they're like, ooh, like that's abstract, like what is that? Like who cares? But fundamentally, if you think about the apps that we use, right? There's an algorithm that's written in that app. And depending on the perspective of the person who is writing the app, there are certain things they're going to consider and certain things they're not going to consider. Not because they're inherently racist or because they're evil people, but because they have a unique lived experience. And so when we talk about inclusion and diversity are good business, because if you say you are serving people, like, you know, DoorDash, right? Our service is we're taking food from one place and we're serving you. We're making it easier for you to get food. could it be that because of the people building your app and the people who are working in your business, there are needs that you're not serving? And because there are needs you're not serving, there are markets that you're not entering. And because there are markets you're not entering, there's money you're not making.
Right.
So when people think about it like that, if you really are in the business of serving, right, then include who you need to include to serve the most people you can serve. So, to take it back to the question of like, was there a moment or why? I just realized that my identity and my culture is a benefit. It's a perspective that other people don't have.
Right.
And, growing up where I'm the minority is an opportunity for me to represent myself fully, to step into rooms fully, and to demonstrate that having me in the room is a benefit to you, because this is a perspective you never would have heard of. This is a concept or a lens you would not have access to. And maybe by me being in this space, it will encourage you to seek out other people who are different so that the room can be more diverse. So I feel like I've always been like this. I mean, my high school my high school had like this senior exit program. And my project was raising money for UNICEF to combat children who are affected by AIDS in Africa. And I raised money by doing a variety show that included African dance and like food from the continent and all this stuff. And people were like, "Oh, this is so great." I'm like, "Yeah, it's like 1 billion people on a continent. Like I'm representing like a fraction of it."
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, I've just always been excited to share my culture and to learn learn more about it. And I don't know, it's a source of pride for me. And yeah, hopefully that made sense.
No, it does. I mean, I think that first of all, I would have loved to have been your friend in high school, but I think that like just being able to stand in the truth of who you are, I think that's great, especially in the school system, and especially when you're a minority. And so, because there's a lot of kids that won't do that, especially if they're a foreigner. Yeah. They will rather, bow their head and just, not be bothered. And there was something very interesting in what you said, is that you are going to fully show up and be like the representative for your people, and that was something that I tried to even instill in my daughters when we lived in Germany. And they were the minority. And there was a lot of people trying to be like folks from the US, especially, the hip hop side of things. And I used to tell them, like, listen, they don't have as much experience with children, brown children from the US. And I said, well, be the best example you can be, so that way their first experience is one where they can speak in a positive manner, because you are the representative coming here. And so, I had one daughter who was more open to, but their personalities are just different. So she was more or less that person that, I'm showing up. The other one was the quiet one, but it was just interesting to me, just just what they had as examples. Unfortunately, World Star is not doing us any favors. Right. And so when you see things like that on the internet, because it's a blessing and a curse, their perception of who we are as a people is warped. Yes, thank you. I had like 2 words going in my mind and I was putting them together. Anyway, warped. And so this is why it was important. I was like, listen, you're going to have to stand strong beyond the name calling. Stand strong in who you are. So it was very difficult for them. So to see that you did it with no problem, I mean, I commend you for that. And I'm really thinking too, like, it's got to also be your upbringing, and your parents must have been true examples of that and who they are and how they stood as, foreigners amongst people in the US. And so for me, like, I never was that. So they had no one to, copy. It was kind of like we all were foreigners together. we were all trying to navigate. And as an adult, that was difficult for me to stand in, my difference and stand in my truth of who I was. It took me some time before I was like, you know what? I belong here just as much as the last person. But I went over there with it would be more like not the full education of who Germans were as a people. And so because of my misconceptions, I had like this fear, and I was that person that, I had anxiety, and I was just like, let me be mindful and da 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 da. And when I realized, I was like, it's not what I thought. I was able to be a little bit more free. And then I really stood in my, in my truth. And then it was just pretty funny because I was the only person that like got involved with everything. If they had a TV camera there, it was in my face because I was the only brown person there doing stuff. So it was very interesting. And so, like I said, I commend you for being able to stand in your truth from young and knowing how to do that. So that's awesome that you are able to do that and really share your gifts of who you are to the world. So thank you.
Well, I think you brought up something, that I can't sort of overlook, which is my upbringing. My parents are very unique individuals. They're not perfect because no one is. And I think the older you get, the more you realize how human your parents are. But, my parents had me pretty young. My mom was 24, I think. And my dad had just turned 30. So I think that's young because I can't imagine having a child at 24. I'm just barely like learning how to take care of myself. So when I think back, like my mom had 5 children before she was like 34 or something. So there were a lot of young kids. And, they were immigrants. They came in, and my mom was a midwife in Nigeria. My dad was a chemist, and they came here and they had to sort of start over. And it's tough, because for them, they came at a time where, they didn't know anybody. They didn't have any sort of like support. My dad was the first one of his family to come to the US. And these are people who, were well educated in their home country. And now you have to come here and sort of like prove that you have, intellect and that you can do the job. My dad was working for a company that was sending him, to Switzerland and Germany from Nigeria. And then he comes to the US and he's pumping gas, right, for tips. So, and because I was born literally like a year after they got married, I've been around for like most of their marriage. So, I was around when, my dad got his first job at Genentech as a production planner, finally, entering his particular field, and then moved over to Bayer, and then, watched my dad in his 40s go back to school and, become a nurse so that he could be, like more support for our family. For me, it's when you watch the people that brought you into the world work so hard to make a life and, navigate all of the uncertainty of being in a strange land and far from all the people that they know and what's familiar. I think it sort of instills in you a sense of gratitude. And for me, it also instilled a sense of curiosity, like what is it that made these two people who they are? And for me, the only thing I could think about was, you know, culture, because it's like, it has to be where you came from, because you guys are so different. Like my dad, when I was young, I'm the oldest of 5. I hated reading. You couldn't get me to read anything, but I was very obedient. So my dad went to Costco and he bought a pack. This is so old. So Costco used to sell Nancy Drew books in sets of 6, and they'd you know, seal them up. And so he bought a pack of Nancy Drew books and he was like, take this book, read it, and then come back and give me the summary of the book. Now, in my childhood mind, I didn't consider reading the back of the book like as a summary and coming back and saying, this is what it is. Instead, I read the darn book. And of course, I didn't consider like maybe my dad hasn't read it. I just read it. And by doing that, week after week after week, I started reading like everything. And because I was reading books that were above my age range, by the time I finished elementary school, I was reading at a high school level. Wow. And by the time I got to high school, I'd read, like my English teacher had to find a different book for me in the Shakespeare classics because I'd read all of it already in middle school. So if it wasn't for my dad, I wouldn't be the voracious reader that I am. I wouldn't, you know, be curious the way I am. You know, from a young age, he always used to tell me, you know, you're as smart as everybody else. There's nobody that you know, is smarter than you. At the end of the day, you have the same 24 hours in the day that everybody else has. And what makes you different is what you do with your time. If you invest your time and you work hard, you can do whatever you want to do. And you know, school didn't come easy for me. My second sister, she could sleep through class and get A's, but I had to I had to work hard. I had to read, you know, I had to do the work. And he was just like, you know, I want you to be independent. I want you to be, you know, able to do whatever it is you put your mind to. And so now, you know, in my 30s, when my dad tells me like, you're the smartest person I know and you're the most well-read person I know, like that's such a source of pride for me, you know, because he knows a lot of people, you know, and he's way older than me. But at the end of the day, like it's because of what he put in me. It's what he instilled in me at a very young age that has, you know, served me for all these years. It's allowed me to sort of ignore the fear and the doubt when I'm, you know, entering a new opportunity or a new space. It's the courage that I have to try new things. And sometimes, you know, it drives him crazy because he's like, can you not just focus on your regular job? Like all these projects, like just do your job. And, you know, but at the end of the day, I'm like, look, it's, you know, it's a double-edged sword.
Right.
You know, I'm always going to be striving because of what you put in me. So, yeah.
Wow. So let that be an example to our listeners that those of us who are parents or who want to be parents, that it's so important, you know, the example that you set out for your children, and then just the things and opportunities that you place in front of them, because your dad could have just looked at the fact that you don't read or you don't like to read and not do anything. But the fact that he put those books in front of you and you knew you better read them books.
Right. Exactly.
Yes, because that's a whole other story that I think that in itself helps and is an example to our parents that we truly are in charge of our children's future, and we shouldn't put all of it on our teachers. And we are learning now too, like how much our role is important. The other thing that you brought up, which was like super significant, that I want our listeners to also think about, especially when you're dealing with people from day to day and really in the state of our I don't even want to say the world, I want to say of the US right now, when you're dealing with different people. Something that was an eye opener for me when I went to Germany is being in that position of, like I said, being the foreigner. Now, mind you, my family, we are from Panama, my mother's side. My dad is American, but I've always had the two sides of, you know, being foreign, but being US. However, I didn't feel like I didn't belong. And so, you know, those things where people, where you kind of like, as growing up, you hear the sayings about like, oh, the foreign people who come here, what they do, how they drive, their jobs, blah, blah, blah. Those things are getting into you, and you don't realize that you're taking on those thoughts.
Right.
Now, you may not verbalize it, or maybe you say it and joke with your friends, but you don't realize how much of an impact that could possibly be if you start to act upon those thoughts. So when I went overseas, and I realized that now I'm that person fighting to prove myself. And I was amongst other refugees coming from the different countries, who, you know, one was an engineer, and then the next thing he was washing dishes in, you know, the restaurant because they wouldn't accept his degree, and he would have to start over, that whole thing. And I was just like, I had that aha, aha of, oh my goodness. That is the same stipulations that we had in the US of foreigners that came over who were just trying to survive. And it was not a matter of, oh, they're taking all their jobs or whatever, or they take the whatever jobs. No, it's because that's the jobs that they could get. And that is what they needed to have their family survive. And they had, it was the humility of it. And so like, it was just like one of those moments, you know, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just as bad as the rest of them, just for the thought process. And then I was like, now I'm on the other side. So it just had me to develop another or greater sense of compassion. So I say to our listeners, please, like, take a moment and just visualize that being you, and the feeling and how that would feel, you being the outsider in somewhere, anywhere, and now think about that when how you treat, you know, the different people. Wow.
Yeah.
That's big. That's really big. That's what people need to travel. People got to travel. So they can see how it is to be in other places. But that was big. And if nothing else, I hope my girls get to see that aspect, that, you know, it's the difference of how it is to be treated when you're the outsider, and the difference, even being back home. Like, coming back, they're still kind of outsiders because they were young when we went over there. So coming back, they're almost like foreigners again in their home country. So it's very interesting, the whole process. But I'm hoping that later on in life, they'll see and be able to take that and develop it into something positive.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. So when you, besides dad saying, please concentrate on your job, have you experienced any other obstacles when you decided, no, I want to dedicate my life over here to empower the community and entrepreneurs and people, you know, creatives? Did you have any obstacles? And if you did, what were they and how did you overcome them?
So, to give you a little bit of perspective, so there are millions of attorneys in the US. Of those millions, only about 3.5% are intellectual property attorneys. And of that 3.5%, about a little over 1% are Black, both men and women. So the pool of attorneys that look like me that do this work is very small. Now, most of them are working in-house in studios, big law firms. Maybe they had a mentor, and so, they had a very direct path. But for me, my interest came after I started law school, after I started working as a lawyer. When I was in law school and I, expressed the interest in, at the time it was entertainment law, I was told, oh, only Jewish people do entertainment law because that's their, community, that's their market. And I was like, well, sadly, I'm not Jewish. So I sort of put that in the back of my mind because I don't know anyone in the industry. I'm not connected. And being the first person in my family to go to law school, my focus was I need to graduate, I need to pass the bar, and I need to get a job. Like, I can't be running around in the streets doing like free labor. Like it won't work. Like, my parents will be like, this is not why we sent you to school. So I sort of put it in the back of my mind, passed the bars, took the first job that I, got. But I kept getting pulled in this direction with like the work I was doing pro bono, volunteer, the organizations that I was interested in. So at some point maybe in the last 3 years, I was like, okay, this is what I really want to do. And my dad even was like, look, I'm tired of you doing this whole side hustle thing. Like, either you make a transition from your 9 to 5 and turn this into your 9 to 5, or just let it go, because I don't know what you're doing. So parents can be very interesting people. So I started taking auditing courses, and again, like, one of the few people of color in a lot of these courses. And on top of that, I've always had an international perspective on storytelling. I've read books from all over the world, but I always wondered, why can't I get books from the continent? I've always watched movies from all over the world, but I couldn't understand why I couldn't get movies from the continent. So every class, every discussion, I'm talking about distribution. I'm talking about, how is the internet closing this gap? How are we serving communities, both of color and non, who want to hear these stories? Like, I think one of the assumptions that people make is only Black people want to hear Black stories. That's not true. All people want to hear good stories.
Yes.
So if you've got a good story and it's Korean, I'm going to watch it. If you've got a good story and it's Nicaraguan, I'm going to watch it. If it's a good story, it's Zambian, I'm going to watch it. So we need to stop putting storytelling in a box that's ethnic or race driven. The question is it a good story? So the biggest obstacle that I faced and that I have been facing is mentorship, finding people who are willing to invest in your success as a young Black attorney going into a space that is predominantly white. Intellectual property is very abstract. And for that reason, even lawyers shy away from this space. If you want to run a law firm, you have to have professional responsibility, professional insurance, liability insurance, right? Intellectual property and entertainment law are the highest risk. There are insurance companies that do not even cover this area. So you can imagine starting out, right, trying to open up your own shop and not having anyone to, show you where to go, reaching out to insurance companies to try and, get your practice covered and being quoted the highest quotes, trying to get meetings and conversations with people, even after having a track record, right? Like, I have a newsletter right now that is read by approximately 10,000 people every month. And it talks about intellectual property, it talks about content. And still, you're knocking on doors and people are like, you don't have this one skill. You don't have this one thing on your resume. Knowing full well that there's somebody else who probably has had less experience than you, or has less exposure, or doesn't have the same global perspective, and they're getting the job. I was talking about getting shows from the continent onto platforms 2 years ago. I've been talking about animation, comics, and gaming from the continent for the last 3 years. Everybody else in these spaces isn't looking at those opportunities. But Microsoft just launched a developers program in Nigeria last year. Netflix just opened an office this year. So I'm not crazy, right? The opportunity is there. The internet is creating opportunities to monetize. But because I don't have networks, I don't have connections, I don't look like certain people, or I didn't go to certain schools, nobody wants to listen to me. So I have to do that much more to prove that I'm worth listening to. The saving grace is I met this amazing woman at a conference that I spoke at in Nigeria last year. She's a white woman who works at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and she, heard me speak, and she said, "You need to work in this space. Like, this is the work that you're meant to do. We're going to find a way for you to, plug in." And she's been incredibly supportive, introducing me to various people. And, because of one person who believed in me, now there are projects that I'm working on. There are opportunities that I'm working on. I would also say that, we don't do the best in supporting ourselves. Because, like I said, there's 1% of Black people who are doing this work. But when I message certain people on LinkedIn and I reach out because we either, graduated from the same school, or, you're Black, I'm trying to do the same thing you're doing, I don't hear anything. And it's frustrating because I understand you worked hard to get where where you are. But don't assume that me coming to you means I don't want to work hard.
Right.
And I think sometimes that's the assumption, that someone who's coming to you wants to skip steps. And sometimes it's, I don't want to skip steps. I just want to know, are the steps I'm taking the right steps? Right? Am I wasting time? Are there skills that I should be developing that I'm not developing? That's for me, that's one of the key things that I have struggled with trying to make this transition, figuring out what are the skills that would, be most valuable in this space. And I could spend the next 5 years accumulating 10 skills, and only 2 of them are the ones I needed to develop.
Right.
So I think for me, that's one of the challenges. And I've been lucky in the sense that I've met people who've been supportive. I've found certain programs that have, helped. And then for the rest of it, you just figure it out. There's a lot of figuring it out. And because I've had to figure out a lot of things throughout my life, that's what I do. But, having to do this as a lawyer makes me so sad that creatives are doing this on their own without a legal degree, without support, without guidance.
Well, that's why you're here.
That's why I'm so passionate about it.
Yeah.
That's why I'm so passionate about it, because I'm like, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There just isn't. I want people to be able to step into their potential and step into the fullness of what their businesses could be without, wasting years and money and time. There are people whose businesses literally tank because they made the wrong business decision or the wrong legal decision. And who knows what those businesses could have been, So the challenge is really, there aren't enough people that understand the stories we're telling. There aren't enough people that understand the innovations. And I mean, there's this innovator, his name is escaping me, but he created this company called Bevel. And it's a company that makes razor blades specifically for curly hair. And it took him so long to find an investor to invest in this business. And finally, I think Procter & Gamble ended up buying the business for millions of dollars, because there are tons of people with curly hair who have ingrowns because of the blades that they use. But that's an example of, if you don't understand that market, you're not going to invest in it. You're not going to see the value in it. You're going to think it's a passing trend. But if you have an attorney or an investor or, you know, an accountant that understands that these are needs, you're going to jump all over it.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, you are worth listening to. I want to hear you talk. Speak. I'm listening to all of it. Oh man, now I just totally blanked out what I was going to say to you, what you were talking about. There was something you said, and it was right on the tip of my tongue, and I was trying to remember everything because you just give so many golden nuggets. Oh yes, I remember. Someone has to lay the groundwork, and that someone happens to be you. So keep moving forward as you continue to spread your message. Those things will be attracted to you. So, yeah, keep on keeping on, as to say.
Yeah.
So who would you say, like, through all this has been your biggest supporter?
My biggest supporter? I don't think it's one person. I'm lucky in that I have, you know, supportive parents. Even though, like I said, they don't always understand. And so that's the interesting thing, right? Like, they don't understand what I'm talking about. Like, I had this conversation with my dad a couple of days ago, and he was like, yeah, so, you know, what is the end goal? And like, what are you trying to do? And so like, I start rattling off the stuff about like trade and policies and like international frameworks. And he's like, okay, but like, so what, you know, and like my dad is a smart person. So the next day he tells me, he's like, so generally speaking, I understood what you were talking about, but realistically, I had no idea what you're talking about. Right? So, you know, for the fact that he isn't always like, you know, clear on intellectual property. My dad, I don't think there's anything I could say I'm doing tomorrow that my dad would say you can't do. Like till today, he's like, when are you going to get your PhD? Right. So like, he just believes so much in my intellect and my, you know, brilliance. And I am so grateful that I have a father who believes so much in my capabilities and doesn't believe. No, honestly, like just from an intellectual standpoint, he definitely from an early stage was like, look, don't take that for granted. I am grateful for my mother because there's nobody that prays for you the way my mother prays for me. There are times that I know that it is literally like I'm the recipient of years and years of prayer. Her and my grandmother, I'm literally covered. Like, I don't, like, even if I never pray a day in my life, like they have just covered my life, protected me and watched over me. My siblings are super supportive. And I have great friends. One of my newsletter, even though it's like super technical, is being edited by one of my oldest friends from high school, Kathy. And, you know,
Thanks,
she
Kathy.
does that out of, no, seriously, like, thank you, Kathy. Like, she does it out of the generosity of her heart. Like, she's like, I read this, and, you know, if you ever want anyone to look through it, and she spends hours poring over these things. And so grateful. You know, my friends Miriam, Alicia, just I have a tribe of people that love me, that, you know, are there for me at all times. And, you know, I've been through so many seasons of life and they're there no matter what. The last group of people I really, really have to shout out, because I know that this alone is a blessing that most kids of color don't have, and it's teachers. I have maybe 4 teachers that I feel were sent at very strategic times in my education that had such a powerful impact on me that I really have no idea where I would be today. The first teacher was in 2nd grade, who realized that I was reading at a much higher grade level than everyone else. And instead of taking my boredom in class as me acting out, she took me to the section of the library, the school library that was for fifth graders, and allowed me to start checking out books that were much, higher grade level than everyone else. And she really encouraged me because she knew that, I was further ahead than other students. And, we now know that in those circumstances, kids will, they'll say you're problematic, you talk too much, it becomes a disciplinary or punishing situation. And instead, this teacher was like, no, I think this is what the problem is. And the moment she did that, I was off to the races. I got awards every week for like reading the most pages, right? The next teacher who was really, really super influential was my English teacher in high school, Mrs. Hackett. She, to this day, checks in on me. I get a Christmas card from her every year. And she is, this petite, blonde, blue-eyed lady from, Florida, Southern lady, incredibly brilliant and just warm-hearted. She realized again, like, I think differently than the rest of my classmates. And my first year, she handed me War and Peace. And I don't know if your listeners know War and Peace, but it's like this massive tome, right? Like it's basically a college level, piece of literature. And she was like, here, read this while everyone else is, reading. And this was from her personal library. And there were a lot of times that she advocated for me and supported me and told me how smart I was and, how unique my thinking was. Another teacher that was really supportive was Mr. Wood, my junior year English teacher. And he was the first person to call me a Renaissance woman to somebody else. Like he was talking about me to someone else, and I had like fallen asleep in class and I forgot my textbook. So I ran back. And this guy comes towards me. He's like, are you Chinwe? I was like, yes. And he's like, here, Mr. Wood told me to give you your textbook. And he called you a Renaissance woman. And at the time, I'm a high school kid. I don't know what that means. And over time, I realized that these are things that people spoke into my life, right? These are people who believed in me. They saw something in me and they encouraged me. And so, for the teachers out there, you may not think that your students remember the way that you treat them or the kind things that you say or the way that you encourage them. But I can tell you without a doubt that there are teachers that have changed my life, that have literally made me feel like I can accomplish anything. And those moments mean so much. Like when I doubt myself, when, I'm like, oh my God, like I'm overwhelmed. Those are the kinds of words that come back to you that remind you who you are, what you're capable of, and what you can do. So those are the people.
Okay, so here we go. Thank you, second grade teacher, Miss Hackett, Mr. Wood, and there was only 3 you named, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Second grade teacher, Mrs. Hackett, Mr. Wood.
Okay, so that's the teachers. Now we have to thank Kathy, Miriam, and Alicia. Alicia. Okay. And we have to thank your sisters and brothers. And we have to thank mom and grandma. And again, thanking daddy. Yay! For being your support system. That is awesome. Yes. So I know you talked about this already, or a part of it, but I want to still give you an opportunity that if we miss anything to talk about it. How do you feel that you are adding value to your community?
So the first thing I would say is this always makes me feel weird because it's more comfortable to be in a place of service than value. Like it's the language is weird for me, but what I would say is I recognize the natural brilliance in our communities. I think that a lot of times people discount their own value. They think that, oh, I'm just making these cookies and there's nothing special about them. Yeah, people like it, but they're just cookies. I remember I worked in the district attorney's office one summer, and there's this amazing woman, African-American woman, who worked in the office as a secretary. And she made these amazing, like you would literally eat your hands, amazing sugar cookies.
Did you say they were amazing?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Amazing. Amazing.
Amazing.
Amazing, right? And people would order them. But obviously because she had like a real job, she couldn't like make them all the time. To her, she was probably like, I'm just baking, cookies. Mm-hmm. But to somebody, those cookies were the things that they need when they're having a bad day. Those cookies were the thing that they pull out when they want to celebrate. Those cookies are the thing that they give to a friend who is going through a rough time, right? Like, see? So sometimes like we think, oh, this thing I'm doing isn't that big of a deal, but sometimes they carry on more value than we realize. Mm-hmm. And when we take the time, to recognize that, to value that, to invest in that by, creating a business around it, or, creating a brand around it, or telling the story of how that recipe came to be, we're not, devaluing it or making it, corporate. We're giving it a framework so that it can live potentially beyond us, right? Mm-hmm. We want that story, we want that recipe, we want that product or service to be able to serve as many people as possible. And so I would say if there's a value that I'm providing, it's changing the perspective on how we see our talents, our gifts, our acts of service and our products. It's not just a little thing that we do. It's something that has value, and there's nothing wrong in saying that and demanding that. Right. So that's what I would say.
Okay. So now these same people that you're working with, or that you want them to realize their value, if they come to you and they say like, I want to do more. I want to become an entrepreneur. I want to step into this other space, but they just can't take that step. They're afraid. What advice would you give someone like that?
I would say two things. And I actually have this written on my wall. It says, the hero and the coward feel the same thing. And I have that there because when we see, like Forbes list, right? All the successful people who've made millions and millions of dollars, sometimes we assume that there's something unique or otherworldly about them, that there's a trait that they were born with that we weren't born with, and that's why they're so successful. And at the end of the day, the truth is, being afraid is human. Everybody feels it. It's what you do with it and about it that makes your story different. Mark Zuckerberg was probably afraid the day before he launched Facebook. Just the same way you're probably afraid before you publish your first ebook. You hitting the button publish is you showing up for yourself and being brave. And the world needs more and more of us to be brave. Yeah. The second thing I would say is be ready to invest in yourself. Because if you want to continue showing up, if you want to continue to build, you have to invest in yourself. If you want a house, you have to invest in building a strong foundation. If you want a family, you have to invest in building a strong foundation internally within yourself. So when people talk about building a business, right, you have to be able to invest in forming an LLC or an S Corp. You need to invest in maybe some courses so you can understand like what it is you're doing from a business standpoint, whether it's, finance or legal skills or getting a bookkeeper. You need to invest in developing business skills, because eventually you're going to get to a point where the operations is going to get bigger than you. And so you need to learn how to manage that. So I would say be ready to invest. And I would also say be ready to invest what it's worth, because I think a lot of times, you know, you want to be able to cut corners some places, and there are ways that you can, you know, save money. But I would strongly urge you to think about, do you want to save money today and suffer tomorrow? Or do you want to invest what you need today so that you don't have to suffer the consequences tomorrow? And that's really important when you think about investing in yourself. The long-term need, you know, it matters. And so always have a long-term approach to how you build and how you invest.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot, but it's great information. I'm not knocking them, of course. That will give them the know-how and to the confidence actually for them to take that next step instead of just inspirational words. So we appreciate that. Because some people take that and they're like, that was so great, motivating. But then when it's time to do the work, they don't do it. So giving direction is important. So thank you. It is the time now for our lightning round. Okay. So that means I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and what comes to mind, that's how you answer it. And if you need to explain, it is okay. I'm not I don't hold you to it, but it's supposed to be the lightning round. I end up talking too, so it's all good. Okay, here we go. Dun, 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 dun. What initially held you back from making a commitment to change, meaning giving your time to your community as opposed to just staying in the firm?
Fear.
Well,
100% fear.
Wow. Now, see, I have to ask more in that. I know I'm like, fear is, yeah, but what kind of fear? Fear of what?
Fear that I wouldn't be good enough. Fear that I didn't know enough. And fear that people wouldn't see me as an authority or someone that they could respect or rely on.
Okay. And that's interesting coming from someone who would think like because you're a lawyer. I think people look up to lawyers all the time. So to think that you wouldn't be enough or not be respected, that's wow. Okay, sorry. What is the best advice you have ever received?
Best advice I've ever received. Don't wait for someone to give you permission.
Yes, I like that. Okay. I'm trying really hard. I'm trying really hard not to go into these. Okay. Share a personal habit that you contribute to your success.
Reading, 110% reading.
Yes. So since you said reading, what book would you recommend to the C2C audience and why?
So this is hard because like I literally travel with a library. Like I have a library in every house I've ever lived in, and the library in my parents' house is like 75% me. Yikes. So there's a couple of books that actually, this is how I'll answer it. So there's a book that I read and I've been reading every year, maybe for the past like 6 years. And sometimes I read it multiple times. It's called The Alchemist. And there's a version that's read by Jeremy Irons, audiobook. And it's a story, right? So for those of you who are like, I don't like nonfiction, it's a fiction book. But the story is just the life lessons that you learn in The Alchemist. It's almost like reading the Bible, how like the same thing you hear at like 18 sounds completely different when you're like 30.
Mm-hmm.
The Alchemist is the same way, where the same section, the same story, the same narrative, the same characters teach you different things depending on where you are in life. So I personally love The Alchemist. I think everyone should read it, whether you're an entrepreneur or not.
Mm-hmm.
The other book I would strongly recommend is, I actually just stumbled upon this recently. It's called What to Say When You're Speaking to Yourself. And it's a really old book, and it's like one of those early self-help books, like the same time as
Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah, and How to Win Friends. Like it's that generation, and it's about self-talk, like the narrative that you have within yourself, what you say to yourself, and how you speak to yourself. And it's very practical because it shows you how to craft sort of like scripts to say to yourself. And you know, I think now we talk a lot about like you know, challenging what your inner mind says, but this is more about what you ingest, and it's being intentional about what you're ingesting daily. So I've been using that recently. I've been practicing that, and I noticed like a significant change. And I'm not really big on like kooky stuff because you know I'm like I like to be really grounded. But it's been really, really powerful for me. And the last book I would suggest is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think that the old classics are classics for a reason. And I think what we see in the self-help and self-improvement space is trying to maybe modernize some of what we already know. And that's why for me, books like The Alchemist, books like, you know, What to Say When You Speak to Yourself and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, they're foundational works. You know, they're really looking at personal accountability. You know, what do you do with the resources you have? What do you do with your mentality, with your time? And I think it also, you know, makes you a better person, because at the end of the day, like, what's the value in having all the money and having all the fame if you're just not a good person and you're not happy inside? So
Right. So the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I chuckled because The Alchemist, I actually wasn't introduced to The Alchemist until one of my podcast guests talked about it. And I think that's like one of the highest recommended books among the guests. And what was really interesting to me, because of course I ended up having to buy it because I'm like, I hear this too many times. But what was very interesting is my girls, I switched them to online learning today, even though they're doing online learning, but I went with the company that was specific for online learning. And they sent them some books for their reading, and The Alchemist was one of them. So I was like, wow. And I said to them, you guys need to read this book. You guys are getting good stuff right here. You need to get into them. So it was very interesting. That's why I chuckled when you said The Alchemist. But I never heard of What to Say When You're Speaking to Yourself. I am putting that on my list today because that is so big. We are our worst critics, and we talk trash to ourselves. And that is something that people need to practice every day. I mean, like, you think about the way we talk to ourselves, you're like, you wouldn't even talk to like your dog sometimes to the way we talk
honestly. And you know, one thing that I noticed after so one of the things that he recommends is that you record the self-talk script and play it back, like in the morning when you're preparing. Like, you don't have to be super focused on it, just like play it in the background. And I wrote, you know, the script out and I recorded it on my phone as a voice memo. And I noticed that after a week of listening to this thing semi-regularly, I would literally have these thoughts like, oh, I won't be, and literally before I even get to, I won't be able to, like, no, we're not going to do that.
Wow.
We're not going to do that. Or like, I'd be like, I'm really tired. I can't, like, yes, you're tired, but you're capable.
Right.
Literally, just like,
right.
Or like I'll be journaling and I'll be writing like, oh, this is so difficult. And I before I write, this is so difficult, I'll write, this is a challenge, but I am capable of overcoming it.
Yeah.
So it was just, there's so much power in the word. And reading this book and, doing this, I'm rediscovering like how I can, encourage myself, because, you're going to get all sorts of people telling you what you can and can't do. You can't be the person telling yourself what you can't do.
Right. And like, I'm a big advocate on positive speaking. However, in my head, sometimes I'm not very nice. And but I always tell people about, I just reiterate, of course, what we're taught about the word and how powerful it is. And I'm just like, you realize, like, with what you say, you can make someone smile, you can give life to someone, you can make them cry, you can get them killed. There's so much power in what comes out of your mouth. And it's not necessary to speak what is. You should speak what you want to become. So I bring up the example of, when God said, let there be light, he wasn't saying, let there be darkness first. It was already dark. They knew that. He didn't need to. He didn't need to say that. Nope. Ooh, child, it's dark in here. Yeah, we know. We know. We want light. So let there be light, And so like, when you think of people, like when I deal with clients and they're like, oh, I'm so fat. And I've done that myself. And I'm so fat. Okay, well, if that's how you feel, and that's the case of where you are, what do you want to be? Where do you see yourself being? And saying, this is a temporary place. This is not where you're going to stay long term, but you can just because of your thoughts and the things that you say to yourself. So that's big. So I'm definitely going to, today, I'm getting up. Okay, so big question now. If you found out that you had 1 hour left to live and you were given the opportunity to leave one final message, what would it be?
If I had 1 hour to live, I would probably, well, the first word that comes to my mind is family. I would find a way to make sure that I saw my immediate family and gathered them together and told them how much I love them, and how much they mean to them and they mean to me. And I think as an offshoot of that, the message I think I would share is that we are a human family. We are all interconnected, regardless of creed, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of ethnicity. We are a human family. And it is easy for us to let the beauty of our differences divide us. We should be celebrating our unique gifts. And we should be allowing for each other to tell our unique stories. And the more that we see our own humanity in one another, the easier it will be to feel like a human family. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much money we have, no matter how successful we are, no matter how famous we are, we will all die one day. And the question is, what did you leave behind for your family? What is the legacy that you're leaving behind about humanity? So if we begin from a place of family connection, from an understanding that everyone has a right to live fully and openly and, in their truth, then perhaps we can build a better life and a better world.
Wow. So, everybody, we are family. Hey, I got all my sisters and me. Hey. And then so we can celebrate. Come on.
Come on. That was good.
Oh, man. So, Chinwe, please tell our audience where they can find out more about you and what you do and support you.
Definitely. So I am on Twitter. I tweet sometimes at Chinwe_Ohanele. I am on Instagram. You can see a lot of behind the scenes of my random life there on my Insta stories, and a bunch of other stuff on my Instagram at Chinwe Ohanele. And that's also where you can get the link if you want to work with me. I have all the links for like one-on-one consultations, and some of the other projects that I'll be working on will be there as well. And my website will be launching very soon, ohanelelawfirm.com. Yeah. So those are the places you can find me.
I love, first of all, I love your name. It just has like this really beautiful ring to it and just flows so nicely. Flow of the names are always so important to me. I love it. Oh man. So make sure you guys go and check her out. And I'm really excited about your website coming up for your Ohanele Law Agency or firm?
Firm.
Okay, firm. Okay. I'm really excited about that. So C2C audience, that is a wrap. I do want to thank you again, Chinwe Ohanele. That's why they called you Hawaiian, right? Because your name.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And Chin, that was the Asian part?
Yep.
Oh my God. So ridiculous. Okay.
Yep.
Anyway. Well, thank you for being a VIP guest on the C2C podcast. And I do want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. We do hope you feel inspired to keep moving forward towards your goals and stick to or make a commitment to change your life. Make sure you check out all the links provided by our guests and share today's podcast and any information or our information with anyone you feel may benefit from it. Please make sure you are subscribing. Make sure you're leaving a review. We want to keep this going, and we want to know what you think of the show. So remember, in order to get to the top of the steps, you have to take the first step. But just don't step on anyone on the way. Don't step on anyone on the way, because you just might trip. This is Miss Nikki. Till next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Change your life, change your future. To commit to change your life, change your future.